For each man by now had a good idea of the calorific value and nutritive and sustaining qualities of the various foods. It had a personal interest for us all. In this way, we added to our scanty stock between 2 and 3 tons of provisions, about half of which was farinaceous food, such as flour and peas, of which we were so short. This sounds like a great deal, but at 1 pound per day, it would only last 28 men for 3 months. Previous to this, I had reduced the food allowance to 9.5 ounces per man per day. Now, however, it could be increased. And this afternoon, for the first time for 10 days, we knew what it was to be really satisfied. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the History of Fresh Produce. And that is a passage, Patrick, from the book South by Ernest Shackleton, the infamous early 20th century Antarctic explorer, describing his challenges of food supply during his second voyage to Antarctica. And this is really a scene we've seen time and time again on the History of Fresh Produce, that importance of food, and of course, produce, on these crazy journeys of exploration, whether we're talking about the Pacific Islanders or the European explorers, going into this unknown, right? Whether it be the New World or other places. And in today's episode, we will be exploring yet another frontier, one that we've been talking about and wanting to really do since the early days of this podcast, right? Haven't we?
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I love, right, is to talk about this topic. And before we even say we're talking about, you've read the title, you've seen it, but I've had the true pleasure of visiting Houston's NASA, and I've also visited Kennedy Space Center not even a month ago, right?
Okay.
And I got to see one of the rocket launches, and I did a lot. And what occurred to me as I was walking through one of the gift shops, because there's so many of them, and there was an astronaut meeting, and the line was out the door, and I was like, oh my gosh, I should have stood in line and been like, what produce can go to space? Like, right? Because then I said to myself, okay, we need to get an astronaut on and talk about that, right? So this is even cooler, to be real.
It is, because as you kind of alluded to there, we're going to be exploring produce in space. Obviously not a history that's centuries years old, more recent history, but this is not a story that we're, like you said, we're not going to tell this on our own. We have someone that is probably the best person, I mean, I personally feel like, in this planet right now to speak on this. So hopefully I'm not hyping her up too much. I don't think I am, though. But she is a now retired food scientist who has worked decades at NASA in space food systems, and where for most of her years there, she served as the NASA manager of the first shuttle and then the International Space Station food system. And on top of all that, if that didn't sound impressive enough, she's also author of Space Bites, which I'm going to try to put that here.
That's
Space
cool.
Bites. Reflections of a NASA food scientist. So definitely recommend that. We'll probably mention that during the show.
I don't have that. You didn't tell me. I didn't get that.
You'll get it.
There's a miscommunication there. I should have had that. I like
something you can look forward to.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's a read on my list.
But we're not going to keep her waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Vickie Kloeris.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to participate.
No, it is a true honor to have you here. As we kind of just alluded to in the opening there, it's something that we've been wanting to do for a very long time. And Patrick wanted an astronaut, but I thought to myself, we need someone that really knows the details behind the food of the NASA system. And somehow I was researching, I came across you. I said, that is the person we need to be on the show and really tell that story. But before we go into that story, Vickie, why don't you give a really brief history of your story with NASA and how you got into this? Because this is obviously not a job that just gets posted every day.
Yeah, right.
On the job search.
True enough. So when I was a microbiology major undergrad, and I really thought I would go into clinical microbiology. But my last semester, I registered for a food microbiology course over in the College of Ag rather than the College of Science where I was.
Okay.
So I was 1 hour short of a micro elective, and my major professor tried to talk me out. He said, just do a white paper. I'm like, no, I see this 4 hour course over in the College of Ag. I want to take it. So I went and I got very interested in the application of micro to the processing and preservation of food. And one of the speakers ran the seafood technology lab, and he spoke for 3 days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in our lectures about seafood micro. And then at the end, he said, I'm looking for grad students. So that's how I ended up getting my master's in food science.
Wow.
And when I left there, I had joined as a student, I had joined the Institute of Food Technologists, IFT for short. It's the professional org for food science here in the United States. And the main reason I joined is because I was going to their annual conference and I would get a cheaper hotel room, right? If I joined.
Exactly.
So I joined, but I was not active. And then when I got my first food science job in Houston, I was working at a hospital and they had a cook chill food system. And so I was doing quality assurance for them. And I started going to the local IFT meetings. And I met some of the food scientists who were working down at NASA. I had never, ever made a connection between food science or food and NASA. Just had not made that connection, even though I grew up about 20 minutes down the road from NASA, from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And so when I met those folks, I really thought that has got to be the coolest job a food scientist could have, is feeding astronauts for a living.
Yeah.
So I told them, ever have an opening, give me a call. And about 18, 24 months, something like that later, I get a call. And they weren't really calling for me. They were calling because they said, do you know anybody? Who would want to apply for this job? And I'm like, yeah, that would be me. So I interviewed and went to work as a contractor down there and was on the contractor team in the food lab, and then eventually transitioned over and became a civil servant managing the shuttle food system.
Amazing.
That's cool.
That's quite a journey to the final spot. But yeah, looks like it was meant to happen between all those points. Amazing.
I love
But
that they called for a reference. Excuse me, we are looking for someone, but not you. And you're like, I know nobody but me, so I'm going to apply.
Yeah.
I love
that's
that.
the way to get it.
It is. It 100% is.
But Vickie, before we really get into produce specifically, I want to hear more about the very first foods in space.
That'd be cool.
So what exactly were these first astronauts like? Obviously,
Okay,
John Glenn. What was he eating on that first flight? What were some of the concerns people had at the time? Because I'm sure there's a lot of them.
So you have to understand, I came on board after 16 shuttle flights. So, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, that all preceded me.
Sure.
I did get the privilege of working with John Glenn when he came back and flew on the shuttle. Years later, he did. The first foods were very limited. Cubes and tubes. They had dried cubes of various different types. And then the rest was pureed, basically baby food that they squeezed out of a tube. So it was very primitive. Apollo Apollo advanced it quite a bit, improved the food system, added more variety, and added thermostabilized products, which are like canned products. But then actually, sadly, Skylab was the most sophisticated food system that NASA has ever flown, even to this day, because it included frozen foods. And we've never done that since, and there's no plans to do that in the future. So the 70s, the late 70s on Skylab was actually the most sophisticated food system that NASA's ever flown.
Amazing.
So
Wow.
Amazing. And I read, I think either in your book or somewhere else, so that these first these toothpaste like tubes that you're talking about, I read some of that the actual food that was in this stuff. It was beef puree
yeah,
and applesauce. So
and
applesauce was
and applesauce was the first thing that John Glenn consumed.
oh, okay. There you go.
When he did his stuff, that was the first food consumed in space. I mean, there's different versions out there, but
That's the truth.
that should be the truth. Yeah.
The apple. See, there you go. Produce the first foods in space.
But granted, I wasn't there to see that. But
No, of course.
no, but just it's funny. I have a good example of how food has progressed, because when Apollo 13 was going to be filmed, the cast came and to Johnson Space Center, and they were scoping out places to film, right? Filming locations. But while they were there, they like a lot of VIPs, they got fed a meal in the food lab. Yeah. So that we did a lot of that kind of PR in the food facility. A lot of space food lunches. This happened to be a space food breakfast.
Ooh.
And Tom Hanks was there, and Ron Howard, and representatives from Imagineering, just that were going to be the producers of the film. And Jim Lovell was there, who wrote the Apollo 13 book that the movie was going to be based on. And across from him at the breakfast, and we never ate with them. We lectured them and briefed them the whole time we were eating, right? So there's two current astronauts sitting across from Jim Lovell. Jim Lovell's sitting there eating breakfast. He's like, this is great. And the current guys are looking at him like, well, it's okay. But it is such an advancement over what he had during Apollo.
Of course,
he was so impressed. so that shows you how the
barometer, of change. But and I imagine too, with food being one thing, but I imagine on those first missions in the 60s, just eating the food must have been kind of something to be concerned about. Just in zero gravity, I imagine there's questions there.
There was concern that they couldn't swallow in zero gravity.
Yeah.
Before they actually did, there was concern that they couldn't. There was concern about what would happen, in your stomach, because in microgravity, as far as and it's true. A lot of the astronauts said that when they ate, they might not eat as much at one time because it kind of rode high in their stomach, So yeah, I mean, just the fact, the floating, and
I was going to have a question, right? That is on topic but off topic, but that would be my assumption that if within zero gravity, it's the same within your body. So your body, if you're in zero gravity floating, that means some of the fluid in your body is doing that as well. Or is there still function like you're saying? Like when you eat, it's more up in your diaphragm or it's up in the top part of your stomach versus trying to digest and move down your intestines, correct?
And and I mean, of course, you're going to have peristalsis that moves it down eventually.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, that is an issue. It's going to feel different, internally in microgravity. Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, and before we get into like packaging and preservation and things like that, my thing is like, if you take an apple, right, and oxygen, right, take a bite of an apple, put it on the table, oxygen will start to kill it, right? It starts to boom. It starts to do that. Would they take any fresh into space at all? And two, if they did bite that apple in zero gravity, would it brown, right? And there's no answer. I mean, if you don't know the answer, like I'm just in my head, like that's my process of thinking, right?
Yeah, I mean, it will brown. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe with no.
It's kind of on the first shuttle flights. So I got there. The 16 of the shuttle flights had flown before. Of the 135 had flown before I got there.
Wow!
And the very first like 4 or 5 shuttle flights, they didn't have any fresh food on it. And the astronauts were not happy about that. And so that after those first few flights, they created what they called the fresh food locker. And basically, they just dedicated one of the mid-deck lockers to putting fresh food in. And it was things like apples, oranges, stuff that would last a while without refrigeration. And, it also morphed into a preference food thing for them. So they could take their favorite candy bar or favorite whatever that was not part of the shuttle menu.
Oh.
So, it was called the fresh food locker throughout the shuttle program, but it really was preference food. But it always included a certain amount of fresh food in addition to the preference requests that they had. But it always had to be, like bananas never worked because they just,
They brown. Yeah, those are
tricky ones,
right?
So it was always stuff that had a long shelf life.
Yeah, like tree fruit or I'm a citrus guy. I've been in citrus my whole life. Was citrus one of them? I'm just curious. Yeah,
of course it is.
Feeling that piece of citrus, baby.
And I mean, apples were probably the easiest just because, you can eat them basically without peeling or, any of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, we took a variety of those types of fresh fruit to orbit.
I like that. I mean, and again, you need that nutrients. It's so hard to take, even today, right? There's so many pills out there that give you your vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, right? It does, but there's nothing like freshness. And I can imagine that, for someone like me too, when I travel a lot, John knows this because John and I have traveled together. When I travel, I go more fresh, right? When I travel, I do less processed, right? And it's crazy, right? When I'm home, I still cook and I do all the normal things, but you have a opportunity to cook like Marie Callender pot pies and things like that. But when I travel, I'm like, it's like instant. I'm getting bananas, apples. I'm getting things because I know as when we're on these trips, those nutrients are going to fuel my body, right, to keep going forward. And then obviously getting protein throughout the day as well. So that's one thing. It's like I'm waking up, banana, apple, boom. And throughout the day, I'm constantly having, fresh fruits and vegetables too for snacking.
Yeah.
So now on the space station, so the cargo vehicles that go up, so obviously, you've got the SpaceX cargo vehicle that goes and delivers supplies. You've got the Russian Progress that goes up and delivers supplies. And when they have late access to those vehicles prior to launch, they'll put fresh items on board. And, when those guys on station and gals on station, when they get fresh stuff, it's like Christmas for them. Yeah, they don't get it every day, So you're looking at fresh stuff about maybe once every 3 months, 3 to 4 months when a cargo vehicle goes up. And so, they are putting stuff like that on as long as they can get access pretty close to launch. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of delivering things and transporting things, obviously a big piece of that or involved in that process is packaging. Because just, again, if we're thinking about history and things that we kind of know from our history books, centuries before with adventures, keeping food in good condition enough to eat was a really big concern. Romans using jars of honey to preserve food, European explorers using salt and alcohol in barrels to preserve food. And I know there's obviously a timeline of innovation in here, but explain to us a little bit about the role packaging has played in preserving these foods from trip into space, basically.
Well, to be honest, on shuttle, we didn't even attempt. I mean, we cleaned them up, we put them in the fresh food locker, and that was it. We weren't trying to package. I mean, the packaging came in with the thermostabilized and the freeze dried and the other items that we had in the menu. We weren't really trying to do any special packaging on shuttle for the fresh items.
No, that food locker you mentioned, that food locker was was dry and refrigerated, correct?
No, No refrigeration. No.
See, that's why that's what I want.
See, that's the problem. It's all shelf stable. There's no.
That's why we can't have the bananas. They're left on the table. They'll be gone in a minute.
In no time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge. When I went to work as a contractor at NASA, the job I was hired to do was to develop the frozen food system for Space Station Freedom. Wow. So the U.S. was audacious enough to think they were going to have a U.S. only space station.
Of course they were. Come on.
Of course.
That thought did not last for any real length of time because they quickly realized they were not going to have enough funding to do that, right? So then that morphed into the International Space Station pretty quickly, and they invited in partners, to help. But we really thought originally we were going to have something called the U.S. Habitation Module as part of the ISS. And it was going to include refrigerators and freezers for food. So when I went to work there, we spent maybe the first year, 18 months, I can't remember exactly how long, working on packaging designs for frozen food, looking at what kind of equipment we would need, to heat that food and serve that food and all that kind of stuff. And then the engineers came to the program and said, look, we've looked at how much power we're going to get from these solar arrays, which is where the electricity was going to come from on station. It's like, you can either have freezers for science or you can have freezers for food. So the decision was pretty quick. You're back to an all shelf stable food system. Yeah. So at that point, we had to totally modify what we were doing. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's always been the challenge. Like up there, they have on shuttle, we had hot water and chilled water. So you could dispense, into your coffee, you could dispense hot water. Into your orange juice, you could dispense chilled water. On station, they don't even have that. It's ambient and hot. So if they do have a small chiller about the size of a typical home microwave, and they can chill beverages. So if they want a chilled beverage after they exercise, they're going to have to rehydrate it with ambient water and put it in the chiller so that it'll be chilled when they're done exercising, but that small chiller does allow them to, if they do have some fresh items like an apple, to maybe help preserve it a little longer, once it gets there. But in all honesty, they don't hang on to that stuff very long. They're so happy to see it. And so, it pretty much gets consumed right away.
It's like a Christmas treat or something like that. But you mentioned, obviously, that this really became the International Space Station, and the American initiative to try to have their own just didn't come to fruition. But with the ISS, obviously, it's an international station. It's in the name, so you have various cultures and people on that station. So what was the significance of that, having to deal with all these different? Because obviously it's one thing to have different traditions or different languages, but obviously food is a big part of a person's identity as well. Right. So what was the psychological importance of eating what you like and are familiar with, and the meal planning that's involved with all that, and making sure, because I can imagine there's just going to be you just exponentially increase the complexity of food supplies when it came to that picture.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when we first started. The first thing we did before NASA, before we started construction of the ISS, we partnered with the Russians to send our shuttle astronauts to stay on the Mir space station, which was up and had been up for a while, in order for our NASA crew members to get some experience in long duration spaceflight. And the original plan was that there was when they were on Mir, there was going to be no U.S. food. No NASA provided food. And the astronaut office kind of rebelled at that. And, they lobbied to get at least a little bit of U.S. food on board. And I can remember talking to those first crew members, and we were going to only be allowed to send a very limited amount. And so I can remember talking to them and saying, what do you want us to send? And they said, well, I'm too busy learning Russian and learning the logistics of the Mir. Just go back and look at my shuttle menu, the last one I flew, pick something off of that. It'll be fine. And so that's what we did. But then after those first couple of folks had stayed on Mir for, I believe they were staying about 4 months or 4.5 months at a time, they came back and said, oh, I should have paid a lot more attention, because all of a sudden food had a big psychological importance that it had never had during shuttle. The shuttle flights were so short. Very few people really paid that much attention to food, because 2 weeks, that was the most, 17 days, somewhere along in there. So it just wasn't that important on those short shuttle flights, but it became very important when long duration space flight came along.
Yeah, sure. And I remember reading in your book, there was a little bit of conflict there too, because of the labeling with the Russians and the Americans. And then, of course, the Russians preferred a very different kind of food. I've obviously noted that in my notes. I said, Russians preferred vegetables and soups, and Americans leaned towards snack style meals. But the labeling thing was a funny.
Yeah, that is a funny story. So everything had to be translated. And the way that we did it on station was the Russians were going to provide food for the cosmonauts. We were going to provide food for everybody else, whether it was a U.S. astronaut or Japan or Europe. That's just the way we broke it up. And so the Russians insisted that we put Cyrillic labeling on all, the names of the food in Cyrillic on all the packages. And at first, that was probably necessary. But after we had worked with the Russians, our folks learned Russian, they learned Russian, the Russians learned English. So it became kind of mute. But I can remember there was one particular product that we had that was called Fiesta Chicken. And so most people in the U.S. would know that Fiesta Chicken meant that it had like West style spices, right? And Southwest seasoning. But when it transferred into Russian, one of the cosmonauts looked at me and said, "What is a party chicken?" Because that's how it translated, party chicken. And they had a product that when you translated it into English, it was called appetizing appetizer. And it's like, okay, that
sounds amazing.
Yeah. So there was some, but they traded food back and forth, even though technically the Russians were just supposed to eat Russian food, and but that never happened. They traded
like with kids when you send them in with a snack to school, they all share it with each other.
100%. Those are called.
Hey, what you got looks pretty good. Let me have that one.
Early days of bartering as a child, right? 100%.
And now the way that a lot of the cultural stuff gets handled, the core menu that NASA sends to orbit is a standard menu. It has about 200 different foods and beverages in the standard menu. They do not eat it per the menu. It's packed as a standard menu, but it's packed pantry style. So all the meats are together, all the vegetables are together. There's 9 different categories. They're going to have one of those 9 categories open all the time. And when they go to eat, they're just going to pull what they want. So even though it's a standard menu, they're not eating per the menu.
Just like our pantry at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, we put it all in there, and then
you go look at what you got in the fridge or in the pantry and say, okay, this is what I'm having for dinner. You know?
Or you say there's nothing to eat in here.
Yeah, exactly. Time to open a new container.
Right? Yeah, exactly. You start looking before we get into like routines and mealtime. how was there any food that ever came back, or was everything consumed by the
Rejection.
time?
On shuttle, we got somewhere around 70% of the food back that we
Wow.
sent because they were there for such a short time. They felt compelled to work, work, work. So they skipped meals a lot. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes sense because these
You know,
missions.
the first few days that they're up there, a lot of them aren't feeling that well. I mean, because there's space adaptation syndrome. Some people are going to be suffering from motion sickness, basically. So it's not surprising that a lot of the meals that they chose didn't get consumed.
No, that makes sense. So when it comes to like the routines and the meal time, like right when it's time to actually eat, and this was quite important, wasn't it? Because look, you just said there was the first couple days you could have the drowsiness, the dizziness, right? But you still have to have a routine because with the I would say if this me thinking of this with the time, right? Time is probably way different up there, so they probably have to have that routine. And we've seen this time and time again on journeys through history, right? The importance of a crew sticking to a routine, right? To maintain the morale and even the sense of identity, right? What does
Mhm.
that look like for astronauts?
Well, it is important, the joint meals and things like that. It's very important to crew morale. Um, on shuttle, not as important, but long duration, yeah. So originally, the all of the dining on ISS was done in the Russian service module because the Russians, it was an exact duplicate of the service module they'd had on Mir. They basically reproduced it, and it was one of the first modules of the ISS. And so crews were small then because ISS was only a couple of modules. I mean, it took years for it to fully, get all the pieces up there to be fully assembled. And so in when they were strictly dining in the Russian module, everyone was eating together. Um, but when the crews got bigger and we went to like a crew of 7, then there really was a need for a second galley, a second food preparation area, because it was just taking too long with one rehydration station, one galley to feed 7 people. So they added a second food preparation area over in the US. So in the US side. And so then they weren't automatically eating together. So now the joint meals are still really important from a morale perspective, but it kind of has to be planned now. It's like dinner parties, you know.
Yeah.
So
It should be, right? No difference than the being at home with your family, right? Like we still call for dinner time, right?
yeah.
Well, it's also
And on the weekends we're saying, hey, it's lunchtime, right? It's some of those things that are ingrained as that routine, no difference than, brushing your teeth in the morning. It's a routine that if you stick to, right? And sometimes you forget though, but other times, like, it is important, right? We say that it's important
the
to.
parallels though between space again and these explorations from past history. There's so many. I mean, it was so critical on these long voyages on these boats where they had no idea where they're going to go. That
Yeah.
these crews, again, they mealtime was a big deal to
Right.
again for socialize with each other, keeping a sense of camaraderie and all these things. So
And they plan special meals for birthdays and holidays and
celebrations,
yeah.
I would
Yeah.
like to have a birthday in space. I still want to listen. I want to go to space. I told my son when as we left Kennedy Space Center, I looked at my son and I go, "Would you do it?" And he goes, "What would I do?" I was like, "Would you go to space?" He's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Would you?" I was like, "Let's sign up. How do we do this together?" I was like, "I would
You
go."
know,
did you,
I
you
wish I had enough money to pay for one of these commercial flights. I wish I had that kind of money laying around because I would do it for sure.
Oh my gosh, I would love to. I would love to be out of this world.
Yeah.
Right? Just
literally? Well,
really, really something special, I would think. When I've seen some of these like celebrities go up and they go like to the atmosphere and they get to see, nah, I'd rather stay a couple
I,
days there.
I mean,
I'd like to be part of the mission. Like,
I still think it's pretty humorous, the Blue Origin flights,
yeah.
because they're literally 11 minutes long.
yeah,
Literally experience like 3 minutes or less
Yeah.
That was life changing.
Real experience. I want the real experience.
It's more microgravity than that on the vomit comet when we were flying testing packages out over the Gulf of Mexico.
See? Yeah.
Not, but I admit I didn't get into the upper atmosphere like they did.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would be so cool, though. That would be so cool.
Well,
Now,
look,
maybe in our lifetime when we're older, John, maybe not, but I think that would be so cool.
somehow we fall into millions of dollars, sure.
Yeah.
But
No, I don't want that Blue Origin. I want the full deal. Like, let's get the shuttle program back up and going again.
This is a sidetrack that you'll probably cut out of this, but that's fine. I just attended, I'm a member of the NASA Alumni League, and I just attended a luncheon, and there was a guy from Blue Origin there. And he was talking about, he's a former NASA flight director, actually. And he left NASA and went to work for Blue Origin. And one of the first things that happened after he went to work there was the all-female flight that they did.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
And he talked about Gail King and how impressed he was with her. He said, because she was, he said, I can see why she's a good investigative reporter and everything, because she quizzed him all kinds of things about the vehicle, how it worked, all kinds of stuff. And he said it was so funny because as they stepped off the vehicle, each person, as they stepped off, they put a camera on them and they get their first comment as they step off, right? Her first comment was something to the effect of, I'm glad I didn't pee my pants. So he's like, what a woman that she can make a comment like that, and not faze her.
It's true.
Very true. Very true. Well, look, we've covered a lot of ground here, Vickie. We basically, if we're kind of aligning this with a journey, whether it's into space or over the seas, we basically prepared for our trip. We talked about preparation. We've talked about traveling on that journey. But the real fun, at least in my opinion, is what comes next. And that is what happens once we've reached our destination. Because throughout history, this is when travelers have had to really start figuring out how to feed themselves in their new environment. And that is precisely where produce really takes center stage, at least historically.
Right.
So I would say stick with us, because when we get back from break, we're finally going to begin to explore a little bit more of the role of produce in space travel. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the History of Fresh Produce. So, Patrick, in the first half of this episode, we really got a detailed look into the preparation of a space flight, the considerations, the challenges, the importance of food while in flight. But now we're going to really dig into the importance of produce specifically in all this, because throughout history, once these travelers, again, whether they're Pacific Islanders island hopping across the Pacific, or European explorers venturing to the Americas, or Americans on the Oregon Trail, which we did an episode on that, right?
Yep.
It was once they finally reached that spot where they said that we're going to stick around for a while, that they really had to figure out how they were going to sustain themselves, obviously with food. And more often than not, produce was the answer to that.
Okay.
And because, you're not bringing cows with you on these things and things
No.
like that. You're bringing plants.
You can't butcher a cow up there.
So, Vickie's still here with us as we explore this side of the story now. So, Vickie, was this something NASA was concerned about once the ISS was established, how they were going to grow or somehow source their own food for these long periods of stay?
So, plants have always been a part of NASA's plan. Because plants can be used for air and water recycling. They've done lots of chamber tests over the years at NASA looking at plants and interacting plants for air and water recycling. And on station now, they have what's called Veggie. And it's an apparatus that they can actually grow plants in. And they grow things and consume them. Things like peppers, cherry tomatoes, things like that. but most of the plant work is being done at Kennedy Space Center rather than Johnson. So it's not here in Houston, it's down in Florida, but they do have a lot of work going on looking at how to grow. And, I'm sure on that first mission to Mars, there's going to be plants being, there's going to be products being grown. If nothing else, the biggest problem is the amount of infrastructure it takes to grow. So that first mission to Mars, they'll probably be growing stuff in transit, but the volume that they're going to be able to grow in transit, it's going to be more of a psychological thing to grow it than an actual significant part of their nutritional support.
Well, it's funny you say psychological because we talk a lot about that within the industry ourselves, right, Patrick, about the mental importance of eating fresh fruit and even having flowers around. There is a proven psychological impact that has, especially I imagine if you're traveling months, if not years eventually through space, to have that sense of life around you in the form of either a flower or a plant that's going to be feeding you. And I saw too when you mentioned Veggie, so it's actually, I guess it's a shorthand for vegetable production system.
That's an acronym.
I'm very disappointed in these. They're not very exciting.
That's a requirement at NASA. So the container that we send food up in, it's a plastic bulk overwrap bag. It's called a bulk overwrap bag, or Bob for short. Got an acronym for everything. So NASA sends up bobs of food to the ISS. Yeah.
And I saw here, so like you mentioned a few of the plants grown, I was able to find, I think it was on the NASA site where I was able to find more about this Veggie system. So they're growing 3 types of lettuce: Chinese cabbage, Mizuna mustard, never heard of it, red Russian kale, and zinnia flowers. So they're even growing flowers. So
it's not a big, my understanding is not a very big unit. So they're not growing all those things at once. They're growing one at a time. Yeah.
Right.
But they've grown a variety of things. And, a lot of it, depending on what it was, it's been consumed in some way or another. Yeah.
And I imagine that the research being done to do this, like you explained, I mean, the amount of variables, I mean, agriculture is hard enough on planet Earth to master, but I can imagine going to space and preparing for that environment is a whole other set of challenges. The one that came immediately to mind for me when I was thinking about it was just, what about gravity? I mean, so much of plants and how they grow, obviously in the soil and the movement of the nutrients and the exchange of water and air and sunlight. How, I mean, you might not be able to speak exactly to that, but are you aware of how they're tackling that? And I'm sure a lot of that research is probably going to help also with the challenges we're facing on Earth with our climate around droughts and very extreme temperature changes and things like this.
So, I mean, that's part of the Veggie unit. It's set up to be able to be sure that the water gets where it needs to be because, like you say, without lack of gravity, it's a little different. I mean, the good thing about going to Mars, you're going to at least have partial gravity, right? You're not totally zero G. So any amount of gravity is going to help a lot,
Sure.
to resolve some of those issues. But I mean, that's some of the research that they're doing is how do you feed the roots and get the light where you need it and stuff in microgravity. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned microgravity because I don't know, Patrick, if you saw this, was one of our industry publications that came out maybe a month ago, and it caught my eye because I know we were going to be speaking about this topic. But I saw it was in Fresh Plaza. There was a company called Aureus, maybe you know it, Vickie, that developed GraviLab, which is a gravity simulator to test how microgravity affects plant growth. So there seems to be companies out there trying to, tackle this as well. So
and and with all these commercial companies coming on board, And, obviously this isn't going to happen overnight, but you've got several of these commercial companies saying they're going to put up private space stations, and so they're going to be in the market for food solutions for these private space stations. And more than likely, they're not going to want to go to NASA for that. They're going to, if there's an alternative, they're going to be going for alternatives.
They're going to find that. Yeah.
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 And I would think you talk about the growing in produce in space before we move on. We all, for my birthday a few years ago, I was given this little tiny little, I would say hydroponic little system that could grow
I have one of those too. Yeah.
Like 10 or 20 little plants, and then it grows, right? All you need is that little light that goes on top, as long as you have electricity, and you didn't have to water it every day, right? It was literally the natural environment. And, I always would assume, couldn't we do that on the space station, of having something like that and then growing
hydroponics is basically what Veggie is.
Yeah,
my understanding is that it's a type of hydroponic system. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
which is in of itself a thousands of years old technology. Too, right? From ancient Americas.
I assume that's what we're doing already up there, right? So that's I mean,
and it, if even further down the road, if you look at something like a habitat on the surface of Mars, we're not talking the first mission, obviously, but if you look at a habitat on the surface of Mars, you're going to have a hydroponic system that's going to be providing food and helping recycle the air and water. I mean, that's just the way it's probably going to happen. NASA's done a lot of research into that area, in chamber tests and things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
So in my book, I actually volunteered for one of the chamber tests. I was in a tiny one-day chamber test, and we recycled all our air and water, and a quarter of our oxygen was being provided from a adjoining system where plants were growing. We were giving the plants CO2. They were giving us a quarter of our oxygen.
And it is. And you kind of answered what we were saying. The common thread throughout history is mankind's desire to reach, for the next frontier, right? And that big ambition for the last several years now has been to travel to Mars, right? And maybe perhaps set up a base there of some kind. We've all, if you haven't seen it, we've all seen The Martian, right? And then,
there won't be potatoes. That's not enough.
Oh, you potato growers out there! I'm so sorry.
I don't think that's enough.
It won't be the potatoes.
I am not a dietitian, but I know enough about nutrition that potatoes alone is not going to.
Spuds are out, everyone. The spuds are. But I think that we have an image that growing food produce must be an important factor in the success of this project, right?
Sure,
it's got to be.
Yeah,
I mean, fresh fruit has to be part of it, right?
Because it'd be flying cows up there or something.
Well, not only that, as we all know too, over a lifetime of eating processed foods, what it does to your body. So, imagine as we're sending, our people to space, and we just want to pump them with processed foods, and that processed foods hurts my stomach, right? Ultra processed foods, we've just come so accustomed to, right? So, I would assume that it's always best when you get it fresh.
If you could get it fresh, yeah. I mean, it's always interesting because they, everybody's pushing locally sourced foods. It's like, okay, I'm sitting in Houston. It's a little hard, I mean, it's going to depend where you are as to what, and processed foods are taking some hits, and justifiably. But also people have to realize, if you strictly go to locally sourced stuff, your diet variety is going to shrink incredibly. Processed foods allows you to have so much more variety in your diet than you ever would in other circumstances.
100%.
So, yeah, you just have to be careful which processed foods you choose.
That's the truth.
It's like a bridge. Like, obviously fresh should be our priority, and then can't fill in there, then you try to fill in with the the least amount of processed foods.
And it's so interesting how agriculture frames and your climate frames your food choices. Because I can remember when we first started working with the Russians, they, their idea, they were so limited to only the vegetables that could be grown in cold climates, right?
Oh.
Yeah. So
it's like I'm saying,
we would try to serve them our freeze-dried green beans, and they were like, yeah, they wouldn't even try them at first. They wouldn't even try.
Now they're bartering and sharing, right?
They must have been what? Turnip. Is it turnips that's big in Russia? Potatoes, turnips, right?
Turnips, potatoes. Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is peeling a potato, right? And the potato, let's just eat a potato. I mean,
just eat it raw, like an apple.
Eat the potato raw. Yeah, that would be I'd make you parched a little bit, right?
People are so spoiled to the amount of variety you can get now. Yeah, we're just totally spoiled.
100%. And John, what about the future? What do you think about talking about the future challenges before we get into reflection?
Well, I think that's going to be best asked by or answered by Vickie. I mean, obviously, it's a history of fresh produce. We never like to predict the future, but we can of course talk about it and kind of discuss what we know. I mean, if we do look obviously back in history, I mean, we know that getting to that next frontier, whether it was the New Worlds, the Americas, or a new islands, or wherever it might have been, or across the United States from the east to the west side to Oregon. We know that people always had to find a way to feed themselves. And a lot of the times they had to get quite creative, and it took a lot of pain in the process because a lot of failures. But ultimately they did find, how to get it done, how to survive in that atmosphere. I mean, one image that just came to mind is, the colony of Jamestown in Virginia, right? That was a horrible failure initially. Everyone died of hunger, and they tried again. And okay, here's the United States today. So I would like to believe, at least, and Vickie can shed her thoughts on it. I would like to believe that, obviously Mars seems to be the next frontier of focus, that somehow, some way, if that remains to be a passion for our species to colonize, that not only will it eventually happen, I can't tell you when, but I think food, and more specifically produce, is going to be a big piece of the success of that story in the end. But Vickie, what do you think, being the food science NASA expert that you are?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, because like I said, plants are going to play into the actual habitat itself. And so I think, yes, they will be growing whatever they can make work. A lot of what NASA has done, and we did during the chamber tests, was based on wheat plants.
Oh.
That's what they were growing, was wheat plants in the chamber. But I know that they've done work with lots of other plants. And so, yeah, I'm sure that's going to be, when you get to the point where you have a habitat, that's definitely going to be a part of it, because you're not really going to have a way to unless we come up with a lot faster transportation system to Mars than we have now, you're not going to have a way to send anything like that to them. Yeah. So, yeah.
And more likely than not, if we get plants up there, we're going to have to bring some of the plant's friends, which is, the insects and the microbes, unless, again, some robotic technology is able to mimic those roles that those microbes play in the whole plant process, because we know how significant they are too. But no, it's absolutely a fascinating topic, and obviously still very young history. I'm sure we got centuries to go in this story, and we're just at the beginning of it. So it's in that respect, it's very exciting. And unfortunately, Patrick and Vickie, of course, all three of us, I don't think we're going to be around to see where this all lands in the end of the day, but we can be part of the beginning story and observing this next frontier. And
we're a little piece of history, right?
Exactly. Well, we're all part of history in different ways. But no, so thank you so much for being here, Vickie. It was really an
Thanks
honor
for
to have you
including
here.
me.
Of course. We were very much looking forward to this topic, and you have definitely marked off a big point on our bucket list here of topics that we wanted to discuss. So again, thank you so much. And of course, to listeners, make sure to pick up, I'm going to try to bring it up here to the front, Space Bites. We will leave it in our show notes.
Yes.
So you can get it. And remember, if you're a History of Fresh Produce Club member, through our partnership with Books Are Magic, you can get this book at a discount. So definitely highly recommend read. I did this. I was telling Vickie before we got started. I read this on a flight to California in one shot. Super easy to read, super entertaining. And, you don't need to know all the fancy scientific jargon. It's a fun read.
And I might add that all my proceeds are going to scholarships for food science.
That's right. Yes. So what more can you ask for? So listen, people, Christmas is coming around the corner.
Let's do it.
It's a perfect stocking stuffer. Okay.
So I've got something too before we end this that I want to show. What I'd like to show you that I picked up from Kennedy Space Center because I thought it was something
it's space ice cream.
How do you know?
It's because it's so classic from our generation. It's always the Dippin' Dots.
It's not. So let me show you this. So I had to buy it because, and what's really cool is we like closed down the park. Like we tried to do everything, and obviously we didn't get everything done. So we're in the last gift shop, and of course my kids are like, we've got like 4 kids on us. We've got friends with us, and they're running around the gift shop, and the guy's like, "Hey, get out!"
Yeah.
Like, he's like, "It's 5:00. Get out!" And I'm like, "Gotcha." I was like, "Can I just one more thing? Can I just show him the moon rocks in the cases downstairs? Some of these are $17,000 moon rocks, right? That are big moon rocks that they have, and then some of them are very small. And then so we were able. He actually opened the case, brought out a 7-pound moon meteorite, and let my son and his friend and myself hold it, which it was something like the best explanation. It wasn't of this earth, right? It was cold. It was like wet. It was rusting, and it was really cool. And then as we're going through, I went ahead and I had to. I bought a moon meteorite.
Meteorite, yeah.
And so the real question is, obviously it's authenticated and obviously, but my question to you, right, is going to be like, is this real, right? Like, I hope it is, right? But that's something that like I had to have this, and I didn't see this when I was over in Houston, NASA at their gift shop. I got a coin, right?
Yeah.
This was there, and I was like, I got to get something like this. It's just, this means something to me, and I love space, and I love what we've done, and so I wanted to show that to you because, I mean, you probably have seen these been over and over again, but
not over and over, but yeah.
Well, you walk through the gift shops or anything, you see them, but it was actually kind of cool because I was like, "Hey, I'd like this one." And she went back and she's like, "We don't have any of those. We only have this many left." And she brought them all out. And I was like, "You only have this many left?" I'm like, "You're thinking like, aren't you pumping these out in China?" Like, right? Just joking around. But no, and my daughter, I let her pick the one she wanted. And she goes, "What are we going to do with this?" And I said, we're going to keep it for as long as we can. We're going to keep it we're going to put it in the safe right now. It's on my desk at work. And I get to look at it every day. And I really think it's something special to me, and special to just being, a human on this planet. Right.
So I'm going to be at Kennedy in mid-November, and they're doing called Taste of Space.
Wait,
at
what?
the Kennedy Visitor Center.
Taste of Space.
And they're going to have a panel discussion that involves chefs. And I'm going to be one of the panelists. And we're going to be talking, I think, from what the gist of what I get is that's going to be, how can we have fancy food on these private spaces?
Well, I think, me being in Tampa, Florida, that you need a +1. Okay. You need a +1 to take pictures of you and to be your backstage bodyguard. You need this from me. I really think that a +1 is in order. I would just love to go to that, because I think that even for our industry, that's really cool. I mean, we interview chefs. We interview a lot of people on all of our shows. So is it open to anybody?
It's November 16th. I think you do have to buy a ticket to go to the event, but yeah, it's Sunday, November the 16th.
Oh wow. So let's see.
All
I'm
right,
like, I'm like,
Patrick, check your
look at this
calendar.
calendar. Yeah, that's right before I go to the Dominican Republic. I'm 5 days before I go to there, but that would be really cool. I would love to explore that. I mean, I would buy a ticket and then I would love to try and meet up with you, right, in that panel, like just to be able to see that, and then obviously, just tell them like, hey, that guy's with me, and I'll be like, yep. I'll just start shaking hands, kissing babies, and taking pictures. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Vicky. We really, really appreciate it. And until next time, that's going to be it from us. It's goodbye from me, John Papp.
and me, Patrick Kelly.